Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a mystery that has haunted the hardwood floors of the National Basketball Association for over 30 years. Imagine the scene on October 6, 1993. The world of sports stopped spinning. Michael Jordan, the undisputed king of the court, announced he was walking away. A massive vacuum was left in his wake, a throne sitting empty and a crown waiting to be claimed. While the media in Chicago wept, a quiet storm was gathering in the heart of Texas. Hakeem Olajuwon, the man they called the Dream, wasn't looking to merely fill a gap. He was looking to dismantle a narrative. For years, critics and the talking heads on television suggested that any victory without Michael Jordan on the court would forever carry an asterisk, a mark of illegitimacy. They called it the era of the stolen rings. But according to official archives of the 1993 NBC News broadcasts, the atmosphere was thick with doubt. Even the league's top brass felt the tremors. In the formal transcripts of his press conferences from that autumn, Commissioner David Stern spoke of a new era, but many heard it as a eulogy for the game's popularity. Yet Hakeem Olajuwon remained silent, his discipline shielding him from the noise. He knew what the public did not. He knew that his time had finally arrived, and he wasn't about to let anyone call his future success a fluke. While the world watched Michael Jordan pick up a baseball bat, Hakeem Olajuwon was in the gym, perfecting a move that would soon leave the greatest defenders in the world looking like statues. But behind this mask of calm, a secret was festering. Just a year before this golden opportunity, the Houston Rockets were nearly torn apart by a financial dispute that almost saw their superstar shipped out of town in total disgrace. To understand the man who would become a legend, we have to travel back to a time when he wasn't a superstar, but just a tall, thin teenager with a dream and a very light suitcase. In the autumn of 1980, a young man stepped off a plane at a New York City airport, having traveled all the way from Lagos, Nigeria. His name was Hakeem Olajuwon, and according to his own personal accounts in the memoir titled Living the Dream, he arrived with almost nothing. No entourage, no luxury cars, and certainly no guarantee of success. In fact, when he first stepped onto the campus of the University of Houston, he wasn't even on a full scholarship. The archival records of the university's athletic department reveal a shocking truth. The coaching staff wasn't even sure he could play the game. Coach Guy Lewis had heard rumors of a giant from Africa, but when he first saw the boy, he saw a soccer player who had only recently picked up a basketball. The transition was brutal. The heat of Houston was one thing, but the financial uncertainty was another. Imagine being 7 feet tall and not knowing where your next meal might come from if you didn't prove your worth on the hardwood. It was a time of immense pressure, a period where every practice felt like a trial for his very survival. He had to learn the American game from scratch, enduring the whispers of those who thought he was just another project that would never pan out. But the hunger in his eyes was real, fueled by the discipline he had learned back home. He was building a foundation of power that no one could see yet. However, the path to the top was paved with heartbreak, and his first taste of national fame would end in a tragedy that would haunt his dreams for an entire decade. By the early 80s, the University of Houston had become a traveling circus of dunks and bravado, known to every household in America as Phi Slama Jama. They were the rock stars of college basketball, and Hakeem Olajuwon was the anchor of that high-flying ship. They played with a swagger that bordered on arrogance, convinced that no one could stand in their way. But on the night of April 4th, 1983, the music stopped. It was the national championship game against North Carolina State, a team everyone expected them to crush. The official box score from that historic night shows Hakeem Olajuwon was a monster on the glass, racking up 20 points and 18 rebounds. He did his part, but the gods of the game had a different plan. In the final seconds, a desperate, fading shot from the opposition fell short of the rim, an air ball that should have ended the game. Instead, it was caught in midair and slammed through the hoop just as the buzzer sounded. The image of Hakeem Olajuwon standing under the basket, helpless as the celebration erupted around him, became a permanent scar on his psyche. According to the post-game interviews recorded in the NCAA archives, the locker room was a place of funeral silence. He blamed himself. He felt he had let an entire city down, and the weight of that silver medal felt like a lead collar. He had the stats, he had the fame, but he didn't have the win. This loss defined him, turning a talented athlete into a man obsessed with perfection. He vowed never to feel that helplessness again. Little did he know, the universe was preparing a monumental twist. Just 1 year later, in the summer of 1984, he would be at the center of a decision that would change the history of the sport forever, leaving a certain player from North Carolina waiting in the wings. The summer of 1984 remains the most scrutinized moment in the history of professional basketball. Imagine the tension in the room on June 19, 1984. The Houston Rockets held the golden ticket, the first overall pick in a draft loaded with future Hall of Famers. While a young, gravity-defying guard from North Carolina named Michael Jordan was the talk of the town, Houston didn't blink. They chose Hakeem Olajuwon. At the time, the logic was ironclad. In the 80s, you built your house around a giant, not a wing player. According to the official financial archives of the league from that season, Hakeem signed a contract that paid him approximately $630,000 for his rookie year. It was a staggering sum for a newcomer, a figure that signaled the Rockets were betting the entire future of the franchise on this one man. The public and the press were largely in agreement, believing that a dominant center was the only path to a title. But as we look back with the benefit of hindsight, we have to ask, was this the greatest scouting success of all time, or did Houston narrowly escape being the punchline of 1,000 jokes? Even as Hakeem began to dominate the paint, the whispers about the player they passed on, Michael Jordan, began to grow louder with every spectacular dunk in Chicago. The pressure on Hakeem Olajuwon was immense. He wasn't just playing against the rest of the league, he was playing against the ghost of what might have been. Yet, even with the weight of the world on his shoulders, he led a resurgence in Texas that felt like a fairy tale. But as every storyteller knows, the higher you climb, the more people wait for you to stumble. And for the Rockets, that stumble would come from within their own locker room, involving secrets that even the most loyal fans couldn't have imagined. By the mid-'80s, Houston had built a fortress. They paired Hakeem Olajuwon with another 7-footer, Ralph Sampson, creating a duo the media dubbed the Twin Towers. It was a spectacle of height and coordination that the league had never seen before. During the 1985 to 1986 season, this experiment reached its fever pitch. The Rockets weren't just winning, they were intimidating their opponents into submission. The climax came in the Western Conference Finals against the heavily favored Los Angeles Lakers, led by Magic Johnson. In a moment that is still replayed in every sports bar in Houston, the video archives from that series show a miracle. With only 1 second left on the clock in Game 5, Ralph Sampson launched a circus shot that defied the laws of physics to send the Rockets to the NBA Finals. Hakeem Olajuwon was the engine behind that run, proving that he could go toe-to-toe with the legends of the game. According to the official box scores from that playoff run, Hakeem was putting up numbers that seemed like they belonged in a video game, anchoring a defense that felt impenetrable. They eventually ran into the buzzsaw known as the Boston Celtics, a team many consider the greatest of all time. While they didn't walk away with the trophy that year, the message was sent. Hakeem Olajuwon had arrived. The city of Houston was ready for a dynasty. They believed they were at the start of a decade of dominance. But just as the foundation seemed solid, A series of off-court scandals and health crises began to erode the team from the inside out. Behind the scenes, the brotherhood was falling apart, and the dream was quickly turning into a nightmare that would leave Hakeem standing alone in the ruins of a once great roster. The year 1987 should have been the beginning of a golden era for the Rockets, but instead, it became a year of infamy. The league was rocked by a scandal that felt like a plot from a gritty television drama. On January 13, 1987, the hammer dropped. According to official reports from the league's anti-doping committee, two of Hakeem's most vital teammates, Mitchell Wiggins and Lewis Lloyd, were banned from the sport for a long period due to their involvement with harmful, prohibited substances. The news hit the locker room like a physical blow. Suddenly, the Twin Towers were leaning, and the supporting cast was vanishing. Hakeem Olajuwon found himself isolated, a superstar on a sinking ship. He was forced to carry a burden that was never meant for one man. Despite the chaos surrounding him, his individual brilliance only intensified. In one legendary performance against Seattle, the archival game logs show Hakeem pouring in 41 points, but even that wasn't enough to save the season. He was frustrated, and his legendary temper began to flare up during games and practices. He felt the management was failing him, and the local press in Houston began to report on a growing rift between the star and the front office. By the turn of the decade, the man who was once the savior of the city was being treated like a problem child. The atmosphere was toxic, and Hakeem was reaching his breaking point. He was a man of immense pride, and he felt his career was being wasted in a sea of mediocrity and scandal. Little did the world know, this frustration was about to explode into a public rebellion that would see the franchise's greatest player call his own boss a liar in front of the entire world. By the early 90s, the relationship between Hakeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets management had deteriorated into a public spectacle that felt more like a courtroom drama than a sports story. The tension reached a boiling point in March of 1992. The team was struggling, and Hakeem was sidelined with what he claimed was a serious hamstring injury. However, the front office wasn't buying it. In a move that shocked the league, the Rockets owner, Charlie Thomas, publicly accused his superstar of faking the injury to leverage a better contract. According to reports in the Houston Chronicle from that tense spring, the team took the unprecedented step of suspending Hakeem for 5 games. The internal documents from the club suggested that the dispute was rooted in a staggering sum of $150,000 in unpaid bonuses and disputed fines. Hakeem didn't take the accusation lightly. In an interview that sent shockwaves through the city, he called the owner a liar and demanded an immediate trade. He felt betrayed by the very organization he had carried on his back for nearly a decade. For a moment, it seemed certain that the greatest player in Houston's history would finish his career in a different jersey, likely in a bitter exit that would leave fans heartbroken. The air in the locker room was thick with resentment, and the media was already speculating on which city would be his next home. It was a dark chapter of pride and professional divorce. But just as the lawyers were preparing for a long battle, a profound personal shift was occurring within the man himself. A change was coming that no one in the front office could have predicted, a spiritual pivot that would save his career and transform his very soul. While the sports world was obsessed with his trade demands and his temper, the man once known as Hakeem was undergoing a silent internal revolution. He began to seek answers beyond the box scores and the millions of dollars. On March 9, 1991, he made a formal announcement that would change his public identity forever. He was adding the letter H to his name. This wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a return to his roots and a public declaration of his deepening faith. In an intimate interview with Sports Illustrated during that period, he spoke about finding a sense of peace that had previously eluded him on the court. He realized that his explosive anger and his constant battles with referees were symptoms of an unsettled spirit. He began to study his faith with a discipline that rivaled his training on the basketball court. This spiritual awakening allowed him to do the unthinkable. He forgave the management that had accused him of being a liar. He decided to stay in Houston, not out of necessity, but out of a newfound sense of purpose and calm. The player who returned to the floor was different, more focused, more resilient, and far more dangerous to his opponents. He had traded his rage for a quiet, terrifying efficiency. The narrative of the troubled superstar was being rewritten in real time. But even with this new inner peace, the ultimate test was looming on the horizon. The league was about to enter its most chaotic era, and Hakeem was finally ready to hunt for the one thing that had always slipped through his fingers while the world was distracted by a certain superstar in Chicago. With Michael Jordan suddenly out of the picture, the 1993 to 1994 season became a wide-open race for the throne. Hakeem Olajuwon entered the year like a man possessed, leading the Houston Rockets to an incredible start that left the rest of the league in the dust. By November of 1993, the Rockets had already tied a historic record by winning their first 15 games in a row. Hakeem was no longer just a great player. He was a force of nature that moved with the grace of a dancer and the power of a locomotive. The official statistics from that legendary season are almost hard to believe, showing that he averaged 3.7 blocks per game, a number that anchored the most feared defense in the country. He became the only player in the history of the sport to win the Most Valuable Player trophy, the Defensive Player of the Year award, and the Finals MVP, all in the same calendar year. It was a level of individual dominance that even the greatest legends could only dream of. According to the league's official archives, Hakeem was the undisputed king of the paint, but the path to the trophy was far from easy. He had to drag his team through a grueling postseason where every win felt like a war of attrition. The city of Houston was holding its breath, sensing that their long-awaited moment of glory was finally within reach. But to secure his legacy, Hakeem would have to face a final boss who was just as hungry and just as physical, a man he had first met in a heartbreaking loss over a decade ago. The 1994 finals were not just a series of basketball games. They were a brutal test of endurance that looked more like a heavyweight boxing match than a professional sport. Facing off against the New York Knicks, Hakeem Olajuwon was entering an arena of pure physicality. The style of play in the early 90s, especially for the Knicks, was legendary for its aggression, often described by sports commentators of the era as something closer to professional wrestling. Every trip down the court was a gamble with pain. At the center of this storm was Hakeem's old rival, Patrick Ewing. The tension reached a fever pitch on June 22, 1994, the date of the pivotal Game 6. According to the official league box scores from that historic night, the pressure Hakeem applied was so immense that he held Ewing to just 3 successful baskets out of 12 attempts. It was a masterclass in defensive dominance. In the final seconds, with the entire season on the line, Hakeem rose up to block a potential championship-winning shot, a moment that is still etched into the memory of every fan in Texas. The archival footage from that night shows a man who had finally conquered his demons and secured his place among the immortals. Houston erupted in a celebration that lasted for days as the city finally had its first major professional title. Hakeem had done the impossible, dragging his team to the summit through sheer force of will. But as the confetti fell, the whispers began to circulate in the national media. Critics pointed to the empty locker room in Chicago, suggesting that this victory was only possible because the king of the game was busy chasing fly balls on a baseball diamond. This narrative of the accidental champion began to fester, setting the stage for a 1995 season that would push Hakeem to the very brink of professional collapse. The following year, the high of the championship quickly evaporated into a cold, hard reality. The 1994 to 1995 season was a disaster from the start. Injuries plagued the roster, and the chemistry that had carried them to the title seemed to have vanished into thin air. By the midpoint of the season, the defending champions were struggling just to stay relevant in the Western Conference standings. The management knew they had to make a move that would either save the season or destroy the franchise's future. On February 14, 1995, they pulled the trigger on a high-stakes gamble that shocked the basketball world. They traded their beloved power forward, Otis Thorpe, for a legendary but aging star named Clyde Drexler. According to the official trade documents and reports from the period, many experts believed the Rockets were making a desperate mistake, sacrificing their defensive identity for a sentimental reunion of old college teammates. The team finished the regular season in a disappointing 6th place, a position from which no team in the history of the sport had ever won a championship. The sports pages were filled with obituaries for the Rockets dynasty, claiming their time at the top was a one-year fluke. Hakeem Olajuwon, however, remained remarkably calm. He ignored the noise in the spreadsheets that said his team was finished. He knew that the playoffs were a different season entirely, a place where legends are forged in the heat of the moment. But before he could prove the world wrong, he had to endure a public humiliation that would provide the ultimate fuel for his fire, involving a certain silver trophy and a man they called the Admiral. In May of 1995, the basketball world gathered to crown a new king, but it wasn't the man currently holding the title. David Robinson, the towering center for the San Antonio Spurs, was officially named the league's most valuable player. To make matters worse for Hakeem, the ceremony took place right on the court before their playoff matchup, forcing Olajuwon to stand by and watch another man receive the praise he felt he still deserved. It was a moment of public disrespect that would go down in history as one of the greatest mistakes in the annals of the sport. According to the league archives from that legendary series, Hakeem didn't say a word during the ceremony, but his performance on the court spoke volumes. In Game 2 of that series, he exploded for 42 points, moving with a speed and precision that left the newly crowned MVP looking completely helpless. He dismantled Robinson's defense with a series of fakes and spins that the media later dubbed a clinic in the post. Witness accounts from the Spurs bench described a sense of pure terror as Hakeem systematically destroyed their defensive schemes. He wasn't just trying to win a game, he was trying to reclaim his honor in front of a national audience. By the time the series was over, there was no doubt who the real most valuable player was. Hakeem had led the Rockets back to the finals against all odds, proving that a 6th seed could indeed reach the mountaintop. The Admiral had been defeated, but the final boss was a young, massive force of nature who represented the future of the league, a man who claimed that the era of Hakeem Olajuwon was officially over. In the sweltering heat of June 1995, the basketball world was convinced it was witnessing a changing of the guard. A young, massive force of nature named Shaquille O'Neal had led his Orlando Magic to the finals, and many experts believed Hakeem Olajuwon was simply too old and too small to stop this new era of raw power. This was more than a championship. It was a battle for the soul of the center position. According to the official league archives from that historic series, the Rockets entered the finals as massive underdogs. Yet Hakeem remained unfazed by the hype surrounding the young giant across from him. While Shaquille was breaking backboards and dominating the headlines, Hakeem was quietly sharpening his footwork, preparing to use his opponent's own strength against him. The results were nothing short of a psychological demolition. The official box scores from the 1995 finals reveal that Hakeem averaged 32.8 points per game, outscoring the younger superstar in every single contest of the series. He didn't just beat the Magic, he swept them 4-0, a result that sent shockwaves through the sports world. It was the first time in history a sixth seed had completed such a dominant run to the trophy. Witness accounts from the Orlando locker room described a young Shaquille O'Neal looking completely bewildered by Hakeem's dream shake, a move that made the most physically gifted athlete in the world look like he was stuck in quicksand. Hakeem had successfully defended his throne, proving that finesse and discipline would always triumph over brute force. But as the celebrations in Houston began, a new debate was ignited in the smoke-filled rooms of sports bars across the country. The king of the game, Michael Jordan, was back in uniform, and the world began to wonder if Hakeem's glory was merely a temporary eclipse while the true sun was hidden. To this day, there is a persistent rumor that Hakeem Olajuwon's 2 championships should come with a footnote because Michael Jordan was away from the game for much of that time. Critics love to suggest that the Houston Rockets were merely placeholder champions. However, a deeper investigation into the actual records reveals a much more complex and startling reality. If you look at the head-to-head statistics between the Houston Rockets and the Chicago Bulls during the peak of their respective powers, a different story emerges. According to the official database of Basketball Reference, during the 3-year stretch from 1991 to 1993, when the Bulls were winning their first 3 titles, the Rockets actually won 5 out of their 6 meetings against Chicago. Hakeem was a tactical nightmare for the Bulls because they had no one who could match his speed and height in the paint. Even the legendary coach, Phil Jackson, admitted that the Rockets were the one team that truly worried them. In the controversial book titled The Jordan Rules, it was noted that Jordan himself viewed Hakeem as the most complete player in the league, a man he couldn't simply intimidate with his usual tactics. There is a strong case to be made that had they met in the finals, the Rockets might have actually dismantled the Bulls dynasty. The what-if of sports history remains one of the most debated topics among the older generation of fans who remember those battles vividly. But while the world was debating statistics and hypothetical matchups, Hakeem was facing a very real, physical challenge that defied the laws of sports medicine. He was performing at a level that should have been impossible for a human being under his specific, personal circumstances. Imagine playing at the highest level of professional sports, where every second requires explosive energy while going 12 hours without a single drop of water or a bite of food. This wasn't a punishment. For Hakeem Olajuwon, it was a profound act of faith that coincided with the most critical part of the season. During the 1995 campaign, the month of Ramadan fell squarely in February, right as the playoff race was heating up. According to official NBA press releases from that year, Hakeem was named the Player of the Month during the exact time he was observing a strict daily fast. To the medical professionals of the era, this was a scientific anomaly. They watched in disbelief as his body, under extreme dehydration and caloric deficit, somehow became even more efficient on the court. He would wake up before sunrise to eat a simple meal and then go the entire day, including grueling practices and high-stakes games, without any sustenance until sunset. In interviews from that period, Hakeem often remarked that the fast gave him a sense of mental clarity and spiritual strength that outweighed any physical fatigue. However, the internal documents of the team's training staff suggested they were constantly monitoring his vital signs, terrified that his heart might give out under the immense strain. He was defying the very foundations of athletic performance, proving that the mind could indeed master the body. This period of his life added a layer of mystique to his persona that went beyond basketball. He was seen as a modern-day warrior monk. But as the late 90s approached, the invincibility of his youth began to fade, and a series of medical scares would soon threaten to bring his legendary career to a premature and frightening end. By the late 90s, the Houston Rockets were no longer a team. They were an expensive collection of aging legends, a desperate attempt to capture lightning in a bottle one last time. In 1996, the front office made a move that felt like a blockbuster movie casting, bringing in the outspoken and championship-hungry Charles Barkley. The city was told that a new dynasty was being born, a big three that would rival anything in the history of the league. However, the chemistry in the locker room was toxic from the very beginning. According to the financial records of the era, the team later doubled down on this high-stakes gamble by acquiring Scottie Pippen, handing him a massive contract worth $67 million. On paper, it was a dream team, but in reality, it was a collision of massive egos. While Hakeem Olajuwon remained a figure of quiet discipline and spiritual calm, his new superstar teammates were often at each other's throats. Reports from the local media in Houston described a locker room divided by petty grievances and arguments over who should take the final shot. Hakeem found himself in the middle of a verbal war between Barkley and Pippen, a conflict that eventually spilled out into the public eye through scathing interviews. The official game logs from those seasons show a team that was talented but fundamentally broken, unable to overcome the internal friction that was rotting the organization from within. The fans who had cheered for 2 titles were now watching a slow-motion car crash of a season. But as the unity of the team dissolved, Hakeem was facing an even more terrifying reality. His own body, the machine that had dominated the league for 15 years, was beginning to send out warning signals that his time in the spotlight was nearing a very dark and uncertain conclusion. The beginning of the new millennium brought a chilling revelation that sent shockwaves through the medical staff in Houston. During a routine checkup, doctors discovered that Hakeem Olajuwon was suffering from a cardiac instability, a heart arrhythmia that made every minute on the court a potential gamble with his physical safety. The news was kept behind closed doors for as long as possible, but the secret eventually leaked into the sports pages. For the first time in his life, the man who had outlasted every giant in the game was told that his heart could no longer sustain the rhythm of the NBA. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Instead of honoring their legend with a graceful exit, the Rockets' management made a decision that many fans still view as the ultimate betrayal. On August 2, 2001, the unthinkable happened. Hakeem Olajuwon was traded to the Toronto Raptors. According to the official trade documents and the league's financial reports, the deal was built around a final contract worth $18 million over 3 years. Seeing the greatest player in the history of Texas wearing a purple jersey in Canada felt like a glitch in the universe. In interviews from that period, Hakeem maintained his dignity, but the hurt was visible to anyone who knew his history with the city. He went from being the king of Houston to a bench player in a foreign land, struggling to keep up with players half his age. It was a quiet, almost somber conclusion to a career that had once reached the highest peaks of glory. He left the game not with a roar, but with a whisper, disappearing into the cold northern air. Yet, even as he walked away from the professional court, Hakeem was quietly building a secret empire that would eventually make his basketball earnings look like pocket change. After the sneakers were hung up for good, Hakeem Olajuwon didn't just fade into retirement like so many other aging stars. He transformed himself into a mysterious figure, a sensei of the hardwood who possessed secrets that every modern superstar was desperate to buy. He retreated to his private ranch, but the phone wouldn't stop ringing. In 2009, the sports world was stunned when the legendary Kobe Bryant made a pilgrimage to Houston to spend a week studying under Hakeem. Bryant wasn't the only one. Soon, LeBron James and other elite players were lining up for a chance to learn the dream shake. But this wisdom came at a staggering price. According to reports in Slam magazine and other major sports outlets, Hakeem was charging a fee of $50,000 for a single week of personal training. It was a massive sum, even for multi-millionaires, but the results on the court were undeniable. He wasn't just teaching moves, he was selling a philosophy of footwork and balance that no one else in the world could replicate. The archives of these training sessions are kept under lock and key, viewed only by the select few who can afford the entry fee. This second career cemented his legacy as the ultimate teacher of the game, a man whose influence continued to shape the league long after his own era had ended. But while he was coaching the next generation, Hakeem was also playing a much larger game in the world of high-stakes business, amassing a fortune that few in the public could have ever estimated. While his peers were spending their fortunes on flashy lifestyles and high-risk investments, Hakeem Olajuwon was quietly becoming one of the most powerful landlords in the state of Texas. This is a side of the story that the major athletic brands would prefer to keep out of the headlines. During the height of the sneaker wars in the 1990s, when every superstar was signing $100 million deals with companies like Nike or Reebok, Hakeem did the unthinkable. He walked away from the glitz and the corporate machinery. According to the Retail Archives from 1995, he partnered with a company called Spalding to release a high-quality basketball shoe that sold for exactly $34.99. His reasoning was grounded in his personal values. He wanted every young person in the inner city to be able to afford the same equipment he wore on the professional court. He refused to be a billboard for corporate greed, a move that stunned the industry. But do not let that modesty fool you regarding his financial power. According to the public tax registries of Harris County, Hakeem has invested over $100 million into prime real estate in the city of Houston alone. He did not just buy luxury homes. He acquired massive tracts of undeveloped land, parking garages, and large commercial buildings. It is reported in financial circles that he often acquires these properties with full cash payments, avoiding the interest traps and debt that have ruined so many other athletes after their playing days. He has become a titan of industry, a man whose net worth today is estimated to dwarf the total earnings from his entire basketball career. He proved that you do not need to sell your image to the highest bidder to build a permanent empire. But as we look at his incredible wealth and his quiet life, one question still hangs over the sport. Where does he truly stand among the greats when the cameras are finally turned off? As our investigation into the life of the dream comes to a close, we are left with a legacy that is as sturdy as the skyscrapers he now owns. Hakeem Olajuwon did not just play the game. He mastered it in a way that defied the logic of his era. When the league officials gathered in 1996 to name the 50 greatest players in the history of the sport, his inclusion was a foregone conclusion. But the numbers tell a story that even the highlight reels cannot fully capture. According to the final verified statistics from the official history books, Hakeem concluded his time on the court with a total of 3,830 blocked shots. This is not just a record. It is a mountain that no one has even come close to climbing since his departure from the league. He remains the all-time leader, a gatekeeper of the paint, who turned defensive play into a form of high art. Some critics will always point to the period when Michael Jordan was away, trying to diminish the titles won in Houston as mere accidents of timing. But those who were in the trenches, the players who had to experience the dream shake firsthand, know the truth of the matter. Hakeem did not need anyone to be absent to be the best. He was the best because he possessed a combination of spiritual discipline and physical genius that we may never witness again. He walked away from the game on his own terms, leaving behind a trail of broken records and silenced doubters. Today, he lives between two worlds, a quiet legend who does not require the spotlight to validate his greatness. As the lights go down on this investigation, we are left to wonder, in a world obsessed with loud talk and empty fame, was Hakeem Olajuwon the last true master of the hardwood? Or is there another secret still hidden in his quiet empire, waiting for the right moment to be revealed to the world?